I'm Steph, that quirky bird girl. Hold up, I just heard a western osprey. Oh, it's a laughing kookaburra! A blue jay. And don't even get me started on the belted kingfisher. Birds, aves, uccellis. That's birds in 3 different languages. The more you bird know. Hit that follow and subscribe button for more bird fun. Watch my TV show one day. Hello, and welcome back to That Quirky Bird Girl. I am your host, Steph, and today I have here with me, y'all, Cat Fribley, and she is a bird lover, bird enthusiast, and she is also the Executive Director at Birdability. Hi, Cat.
Hi, I'm so glad to get to be here with you today.
Me too. I'd love to get started with just hearing some of your recent passion projects or what brings out that passionate fire in you.
Yeah, I would love to tell you a little bit about, maybe tell you a little bit about me and how I got here, which might be useful as we have this conversation.
Absolutely.
So I am a multiply disabled, middle-aged, fat, purple-haired woman with really sparkly glasses. And I live in Iowa City, Iowa, which is the traditional land of the Meskwaki and the Iowa. And I live here with my wife and our partner, 2 adorable indoor cats, and an incredible cast of backyard birds that bring me more joy than you could ever even imagine. And I started doing this work at Birdability as the executive director back in 2023 after 30 years of doing anti-sexual violence. And I've been a birder since I was 8. So 37 plus years now of joy in birds. And so when you talk about passion projects, it's so fun because this new sort of chapter of my professional life is nothing but passion projects. It is fully about passion and joy and access and birds. So I don't even know where to start. Help me figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can start a little bit with what made you be so passionate or feel this sort of passion for the birds and driving you to birdability.
Yeah. So wow, where to start? So as a child, I experienced some sexual violence in my life. And it wasn't until I actually went to college that would have been in the late 80s, which tells you a little bit about my age, that I started to really grapple with the effect that child sexual abuse was having on my day to day and in my life. And I happened at the same ish time to have a roommate who was a birder. And so the glorious thing about that is that I was able to, at the same time that I got sort of my first initial diagnosis of PTSD and started trying some what I would think of as pretty traditional modalities for starting to heal, I also had this terrific new doorway open to me, which was paying deep attention to birds and being in nature in order to find more birds. And my lovely roommate would say all the time to me, like, let's go birding, let's go out, do you want to? And I had the car, which was great. This was an important piece because I had a car that could get us to Danger Island or the Slough or some of the other really lovely birding sites along the Mississippi River where we went to school. And she had the bird knowledge and the bird books and the binocs. And so put it together, and birding became a really joyful part of my life, being out in nature with Naya, being out, you know, paying attention to birds, learning about birds, really became a deep part of my journey in life. And that was about healing, but it was also about connection and community and just all kinds of joy.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it looked like when you had just gotten this diagnosis and you're turning to the birds a little bit and you have this friend who's kind of guiding you? What was your relationship with that diagnosis?
Yeah, so I've had a complicated relationship with diagnoses around mental health and trauma, in part because as I continued growing and learning, more and more I strayed away from what I would consider to be the medical model of thinking about trauma and away from wanting to be seen as a diagnosis that could be fixed and instead wanting to root myself in the fact that there are so many people out there who experience sexual violence and sexual abuse, and in such a way that it is something that has happened to us, that we're having a natural reaction to, and not something that is wrong with us, not something that has to be diagnosable. And does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, it was such a learning journey for my baby self back when I was 18 years old. I heard PTSD, I heard depression, I heard anxiety as diagnoses that were wrong with me. And as much as the folks who were the mental health professionals who were trying to support me at that time were trying, I think, to provide resources and skills and coping mechanisms, there wasn't as much that was available to me that firmly placed the violence that had happened in my life, the abuse that had happened in my life, as part of a larger cultural context that wasn't really about me,
Mm.
um, in some ways. I don't know if that makes sense, but when you think about sexual violence, like, it's an outgrowth of oppression and marginalization and power. And the place that eventually like helped give me lots of new tools to think about that was both um, a medical model kind of healing modality, but also then trauma informed services and trauma informed kinds of work over 30 years. So I got to learn as I learned how to be of service to others.
Yeah, and did that turning point away from the medical model is, it sounds like, I'm a survivor as well. So I feel a lot, or I hear a lot of my story and what you're saying. And so, I think, and tell me if this is your experience as well, but it can be, the medical model can feel like it's my fault. It's my fault that I'm processing it this way. It's my fault. I need to do more to step out of my depression, to step out of my anxiety.
Yeah.
Was that something that you struggled with?
I mean, I think that there's a piece of it in which, unless we're rooted in sort of the understanding of violence as being a social problem, uh, that if we are not rooted in that, it can easily feel like this is about me. This is my fault. I must have done something. And survivors over and over again would tell me that. They would say, this must have been my fault. I didn't fight back hard enough. I didn't say the right thing. I didn't do the right thing in that moment. And the thing that was my job as an advocate was to consistently remind folks that anything they did to survive was okay, and that the perpetration that happened was not their fault. Period. It lies, the fault of that lies with the person who hurt you, straight up. And when I think, I could say that to survivors over and over again, it was also like saying it to myself over and over again. A reminder every single day that there is nothing as a survivor that I should have to be ashamed about. There's nothing as a survivor that I should take as being a flaw or something that makes me unworthy or um, any of those kinds of things, because it is a real, like, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's a real healing mechanism to begin to be able to see yourself as resilient and adaptive for surviving. And as, again, this sort of violence that happens in our lives as being something that was outside of our control, which is what PTSD is all about. right? Like we experienced a trauma and we're having a natural response to that trauma, to that lack of control, to that lack of ability to put up boundaries about our own bodies or our own lives. And so for me, it has been a learning journey over all of these years. And I think it probably will be a learning journey for the rest of my life, right? I don't think healing ever stops.
No, and I think we take a lot of lessons along the way, and there are things that we can pull at and like take little breaks. But I think you're right that it feels like an ongoing mission. And I know in your work, as someone who has sit in and on a few of your talks, I can feel that work has been done. I can feel that you are sort of a safe space and you create that in your conversations. So can you guide me through a little bit how you've been able to sort of convert your healing journey and your experience, your 30 years experience working with these survivors and then being a survivor yourself? How did you bring that to what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. Such a joy to be able to now have this work that in many ways focuses on joy because joy is absolutely necessary for healing, right? Like, I cannot say enough how often I would say, oh, well, I'm working on this part of myself, or I'm working in this thing, and I remember I had a therapist who said to me once, what would it be like to not have to work so what would it be like to just enjoy and to heal as much through joy as you do through effort, if you will? And I that was something I had never considered, Steph. I don't know about you, but I always thought that was just like that was how it worked. You worked at healing. You worked at like changing how you perceive things and move through the world. And that's absolutely a part of it. No doubt about it. What is really important is to balance that with joy. And so this now new path, this new journey in my life of working with birdability, which is about creating access to birding in natural lands for people with disabilities and other health concerns, has been such a leap into a new way of using old skills. Because I think part of what you're naming is you and I have talked a little bit in the past about this is I have a deep desire to just be with people as they are. I have a deep desire to be able to be with people as I am, wholly and fully and vulnerably, and as a flawed human being who, is just trying to move through this world and make it a better place, a better space for survivors, for folks with disabilities, for birders, for BIPOC folks, for other folks who are navigating hatred in the world. Like, my hope is that by showing up most fully as myself, that I invite others to show up most fully as themselves too.
Yeah, and it absolutely does relay. And I want to go back for a second to the joy and happy or joy and healing because
Yes.
I just put a sticky note on my fridge that says joy and healing happen together. And
Yes.
I think being such like a driven, ambitious person, you often can get like lost in the healing where it's like, okay, I have to be this version of myself. In order for people to see me as authentic in front of a camera and showing up, I have to be completing this milestone in my healing journey. I'm not sure if that's something that you relate to, but it can feel almost like you're at competition with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a deep part of it is there. I think that the times where I've had the hardest time are times where I have believed that there are sort of check marks that I need to be crossing off for healing. Or frankly, check marks that I need to be crossing off for birds that I've observed. Or frankly, check marks that I need to be crossing off for like, oh, these are all the activities that I need to do in order to exist in this world and be worthy of something. And the reality and the truth is that the ways that we show up in this world and who we are is intrinsically and wholly enough.
Yeah.
It's just intrinsically and wholly enough. We don't need to cross something off and say, like, okay, I made it around this healing loop and I've fulfilled this step and now I can move on to the next step and that's how it's going to work. Because ultimately, healing is never something that is done. It's not linear. There aren't check boxes. And when we just like fool ourselves into thinking that there are, then we feel like failures,
A
you know?
100%.
Because then I'm like, oh, I'm still struggling with the same thing. I must not be doing the work. And the reality is, of course, I'm still going to be struggling with that thing. I'm going to struggle with it my whole life in sort of cycles. I like to think of healing as a spiral because I keep connecting to that same issue. But every time I do, it's like a little bit farther around, and a little bit farther around. And that is as much about learning to give grace to myself and others as it is about joy, as it is about the work of it, as it is about showing up vulnerably and authentically.
I love the way that you put that, particularly with the spiral and then also relating it back to birds. I think often what I found within my community and even amongst myself, sometimes I have to challenge myself a little bit where I'm like, okay, if I see this bird X amount of times, then it's okay for me to talk about it on social media. But it's not okay until I see them and I experience them in this way and I've watched this behavior. And it's this like self.
To tell us that. Like, who made that rule that we think we have to follow? There's no rules to birding.
Ugh.
There's no rules to healing.
And I love that. Like, how did you get to a place where you were kind of like telling yourself that with birds in particular, that there were no rules to healing? And maybe you can relate it to your healing journey a little bit too, or yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I will say is that for the first 30 plus years of my life, my birding wasn't in community with other people for the most
Mm.
part. Not with the traditional birding community, I should be clear. It was in community with my friends, my family, other people who I love, but I wasn't somebody who understood even that there was a formalized sort of birding world that existed. That's not how my entry point to birding happened. It wasn't how most of, if any, of my birding up until my time with birdability
Mm.
happened. And so I think that there's a piece there that is really important to name, which is I just birded for myself. I just birded for the joy of it. And so there didn't have to be any rules because nobody else was a part of it. It was just about me and the birds that I got to watch and listen to and observe. And if that was house finches on my back deck, that felt just as spectacular and important as a Cassin's kingbird did. And so I I think that that made it easier in some ways because I didn't actually know that there was this sort of formal bird world in which there could even be rules or construed rules or sort of a gatekeeping way of thinking about birding and how people bird because that just wasn't how things worked for me. It just wasn't. Sorry, I was trying to. There we go.
Okay. And what was it like when you started entering into spaces where it did feel like there were rules and it was kind of because I can really relate to that, like especially, and it's admittedly, it's kept me from feeling like I can enter those spaces. And even since moving to New York, I haven't gone to many, if any, group events because of that same pressure. I don't want my bird experience to be like caged in like a bird.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons that birdability, I connected so deeply with birdability and birdability's mission is that one of the primary things that their, um, sort of messaging was about was that in order to make birding accessible to everyone, we needed certainly physical kinds of access at
Mm.
parks or public lands or birding sites, but that just as important was redefining what birding meant. And that for birdability and for me, and I think probably for you and for many in the world, Birding is straight up just the experience of enjoying wild birds, hard stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it. You don't have to list, you don't have to identify, you don't have to do it in a group. You can do any of those things, and I do sometimes all of them, but equally I do none of them at different times.
Yeah. And that part, it can be so unstructured. It can be fully structured, like as much as you want. So, like, how does it feel to step into some of that freedom? And I want to relate it a little bit too as your experience as a survivor, like going from, we can use a cage bird analogy too, like a cage bird to a free.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because, birding became a part of my healing in that my birding often was about mindfulness and presence. It was about being able to be fully present in the moment and enjoy the bird that I was observing. And again, most often that was like a house sparrow or a house finch or a house wren, all the houses.
The
Every
houses,
kind of house
the
bird
assortment.
has mostly been at my house. And that is a big part of, what I understood as birding was being fully present with and watching and sometimes naming them and trying to understand their behavior and their relationships with each other. And like that is what brought me so much joy or was the opportunity to be fully present with birds. It allows me to be connected to nature, to myself, to my body, to my emotions, but through the experience of observing this bird, which I was doing without ever naming it mindful birding or you know what I mean, like we're thinking of it in that way. It's just how my brain worked, it's just how my body works, my emotions, my soul, like it's what I needed, it's what I did, but I didn't ever give it a name or categorize it. Everybody just was like, oh, that's Cat. She loves birds. She's super birdie. She's a bird nerd. And that's true. I was. Because it was a time where my brain gets quiet, where I can be most fully in my brain and my body without it triggering a need to do work.
Uh,
Rather, where I'm just able to be really fully present and enjoy the very gift that that bird is giving me in that moment.
I think that's so beautiful, and I relate to that. How did you take this experience of being yourself with the birds and sort of being so present into the work that you do today? It really feels like that's something that you have been able to so beautifully like curate. So I'm so curious how you've been able to do that.
Well, the joy of it was here I was in Iowa doing my thing, loving the birds, feeling deeply fed by and healed by my experiences with the birds. And as I mentioned, I'm a multiply disabled person. Some of those disabilities were things that were invisible from birth. I have something called aphantasia, which means I have no mind's eye. I can't picture anything in my brain, which means the way that I bird is really different than somebody who can call to mind an image of a bird and sort of be like comparing them with what they're seeing in front of them. Some of the disabilities were acquired disabilities, specifically PTSD, which later became a diagnosis of complex PTSD over the course of my life. But then also in 2007, I acquired a mobility disability when I fell down the stairs. And it has progressively gotten worse in my life to the point that now I have pretty limited mobility. I use a forearm crutch. I am probably building myself up and trying to dismantle the internalized ableism in my own self to be able to acknowledge that the next step is a rollator or a walker or some other device that gives me a little bit more actually stability and ability to go further than my forearm crutch does. But because of all of that, my experience of finding birdability was feeling like coming home. They originally talked about birding as being this enjoyment of wild birds that didn't need rules. And then, as a matter of fact, they were working to tear the rules down around so that more people felt invited into this glorious experience of enjoying wild birds. But then also, they were talking about the very things that often complicated my ability to go out into the natural world. And the mobility kinds of challenges that I had, that I have some different ways of needing to think about how I find the birds, right, that I want to observe. And so the sort of moment of coming to work for Birdability was not my first role with Birdability. I had found them years before and loved their work. And so as soon as I saw that there was a possibility of working towards those very things, I knew it was the place I needed to be. That this is deeply a professional and personal role for me in many ways. And also, hi, Kitty. Who is this?
This is Comet. He's my sweet baby boy.
Hello, Comet.
I call, oh, sir. Don't slip. He is almost 11 years old. But I've had him since he was 9 months. He's just my little baby.
I love that.
Yeah, and he's got a
The
little sister.
animals bring us so much joy, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, he was sort of the start. Well, I can say him. He was the start of my love for birds. My spark bird is a pigeon, a rock pigeon. And I used to, when I lived in Chicago, I used to take care of them on my patio. When they get that string wrapped around, floss, whatever it might be, wrapped around their feet, I started to get pigeons coming to me, ones that I'd never seen before. And I would take the string, like so delicately, like cutting it off and taking as much care, but I grew a love with the pigeons or for the pigeons, seeing the world a little bit through his eyes too.
It makes me feel real. I mean, you and I think, have had conversations where I feel a deep sort of kindred relationship anyway in so many different places. But in that as well, this piece around birds that are common birds, that are the birds that are entry point and our joy, right? Door opener to birding joy. It makes me think of, are you familiar with Dr. Lanham, J. Drew Lanham?
No,
He
no.
wrote a book called Sparrow Envy. He wrote a book called The Home Place. He is a terrific poet and writer about birds and nature, and he's an ornithologist. He's based in South Carolina, and I just anything that he writes, I want to read. And one of the things that he talked about on a webinar I was on recently with him, or a conversation I got to listen into during Field Inclusive Week, was him talking about a poem I think that he had written where, and I'm going to butcher the exact, words, of course, but the concept behind it was basically, should I wait until you're a rarity to care about you? And it just hit me in every cell how important it is to redefine birding for myself, to being, again, not just the enjoyment of wild birds, but for me, the enjoyment of all wild. That I can be just as joyful about the house wren that is building a nest, in a bird house on my deck, as I am the roseate spoonbill that I took years to get to find and observe, and trips and work and all. And rare doesn't equal more special.
No. Ugh. And I love the messaging in that because I also feel some sort of like translation in it that's happening for me as well. And I'm not sure if it felt deeply personal to you too. It's very validating.
Absolutely. So validating. And honestly, if every single person who listens to this podcast goes and finds some of Dr. Lanham's work, my work here is done.
I love that. That's perfect. I'll check out his work. I think it emphasizes something that I think I've been trying to figure out how to communicate too. And I always tell people like the best bird to start with, in my opinion, is the house sparrow. They're everywhere. You can see them and you can interact with them and teaches you about the same species having two different plumages and like there's so much to interact with in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The commonality, the thread of being able to be in spaces where we get to observe those birds day in and day out, where they're not hard to find, they're not difficult to identify, they're not, you know what I mean? Like, these are the birds that are on my deck every single day. These are the birds that are hopping around outside Target. They are the birds that are, going to be found roadside. Sparrows are everywhere, which gives you a chance to bird and have that joy anywhere.
Oh, and I want to add one story to that because I think it illustrates what you're saying perfectly. When I moved to Argentina for some time, I was going to the park and feeding, I was feeding the birds these pumpkin seeds. And when I would toss them out, it was like I'm carrying a little piece of home with me everywhere I go, even though I'm away. And I'm autistic and struggling with sort of a massive routine change. My ADHD is like, but then like having the birds as a stabilizer. So I've got, I can see rock pigeons, I can see house sparrows, but I'm also seeing monk parakeets. I'm also seeing Picasso parakeet, penguins, pigeons.
Yeah, all different kinds of birds, and also birds were just home for you.
It brings back a level to self. You mentioned something earlier in the way that you visualize birds, and I want to go back to it for a second because I'm someone with synesthesia, so I can make some of those comparisons, but they're done in color and they don't make sense to other people often.
Yeah.
So, what does aphantasia look like for you, and what's your birding experience with that?
Yeah. So my whole life, I have never been able to picture anything in my head. I have no mind's eye, no picture at all. But up until I was 39 years old, I didn't realize anybody else did either. I just assumed that because I didn't see pictures in my head, that no one saw pictures in their head. And so I thought my experience was normal. Now it's such a fascinating thing because back then people would say things like, "Oh, picture yourself in a meadow," for example, for a meditation. And I would just assume that was like a turn of phrase. People just were like, that was just a way of phrasing, like, imagine yourself in a meadow, right? Just generally.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, oh gosh, the late 2000s that I had a friend who posted something on Facebook and said, you know, there's this movie that we just went to see, and I'm so mad because the character doesn't look a thing like I pictured it when I read the book. And I was like, what? What are you even talking about? What do you mean pictured it in your head while you read a book? Like, what is that? What does that mean? And then someone else actually commented under it and had a similar question, like, what does that mean? And it wasn't until 2015 that the term aphantasia was coined. Even though this is a phenomenon that has been understood and known since like the 1800s was the first time it shows up in medical kinds of histories, but it never had a name until 2015. And so the fact that I had no mind's eye at the time, I didn't even have a word for back then. It was gobsmacking to learn that 98% of the United States and 98% of the population overall could actually see a picture in their head. And
90.
I most certainly could not.
Wow. That is a jaw-dropping statistic.
And they say 2 to 4% of people have some form of aphantasia. I have complete aphantasia, so it's a spectrum. one of the most common tests, I don't know if you've ever seen this, is picture an owl in your mind. Picture an owl. And some folks can, when you're asked them to describe it, they are like in depth. They're like, it's a Granny Smith apple, it's green, it's got this, it's like those colors, it's this thing, it's on a table, it's this. And that's on the far side, right, of being able to have visual imagery versus my end of the spectrum, which is absolutely no visual imagery. And folks are all along that spectrum. So they might see a blurry image or have a sense of it or be able to have an idea of it visually. So it's a really fascinating thing to imagine that the majority of the world is just walking around out there with pictures in their head. What the what?
I mean, what the what? Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's like I just see a segment of like or the array of colors, like all of the different colors that apples could be, but I don't see an apple.
Interesting. So your synesthesia is a different place on that spectrum altogether, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, like being out with the birds, I'll paint images of the birds, but it's not always like exact. I'm not always seeing a direct image of the bird. I'm seeing an array of colors. Do you ever see any sort of color? It's yeah.
It's like having a complete black screen in my brain that nothing ever is projected on.
Hmm. And
Nothing ever. No color, no anything. I have a sense of color. I know color when I see it,
right.
deeply feel this is not quite synesthesia, but it's sort of close. Like I feel that colors have emotions. So for me, like a happy day is a brown day, I call it. Like there's a warmth, to the color brown that I associate very much with like a goodness. So in that way, I absolutely deeply feel color in my body, but I don't see it.
Okay. And so how does that shape when you're out with the birds? It's almost it sounds like it would be like a brand new experience every single time. That must be exciting.
In some ways, I suppose it makes sometimes I think identification come much later for me than maybe for other people. Like it takes a lot of times of being able to see something before I start to be able to have a muscle memory of it, if that makes sense. Um, and outside of that, I know it does impact. I have far more um, in some ways, I think ability to identify birds by sound than I do by sight to some degree, which I've
Amazing.
been trying to lean into and learn more about and like honor that. But one of the things that I think is just such a important and fascinating thing to note is that aphantasia and synesthesia and neurodivergence and so many other things are natural and different ways that our brains work. Our brains work in so many different ways. And I think there's just this very important piece of acknowledging they are simply different neurotypes. They are not abnormal neurotypes. And that feels really important when we're thinking about also disability justice and when we're thinking about creating a world that is available to everyone.
And I think that fits so directly and so beautifully with what I've heard from you being your core mission, that really just making it like creating a sentiment around like this is my normal and my normal is it can be safe.
And not need to be fixed and it can be accommodated. And as a matter of fact, universal design probably would accommodate it. And I think that there's a lot of corollaries there when we start to think about um, disability as being something outside of what the quote unquote normal presentation is. But in fact, oftentimes it's the environment that's disabling and not the experience or the neurotype or the way that we move through the world. And I think it's important to continually try to remind people that disability.
Just taking a deep breath to really, like, embrace all of the words that you're saying. I think that there have been so many spaces, as I mentioned earlier, I'm autistic, where I have felt like the problem is me, and I think something that you do and something that I really value in birdability as well is making that isolating experience not feel so isolating. I sat in on the first birdability call, and there were a few times where I felt inclined to turn off my camera because I started crying because it made me very emotional about the work that you're doing and honestly the healing that you're doing. I want to say, like, thank you for your voice. It's so valuable to me hearing the way that you talk about yourself as a survivor. Um, there was a call that we had a few weeks ago, and that conversation has changed my life. You have changed my life. So thank you. Thank you so, so much.
It's an Audre Lorde quote, and it's without community, there is no liberation. And I just hold this so close in my heart. It's the one of the things that I feel very, very deeply that we need community to heal. We need community for liberation. We need community for change. We need community for a space where each of us get to meet folks who will help reimagine our own way forward. And I'm so deeply grateful to you because every person that we meet, every person that we get to be in space with, yourself included, changes who I am too.
Ugh, just out here changing lives, Kat. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. Like, I would just ask you to like reflect that right back on yourself, friends, because each of us is out here existing, hopefully in ways that change our own lives and others every day, and may it be for the better.
I think this is a great note for us to close out on too. I think our values on community, I think it's the only area where trickle down economics might be able. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, it has been so great to talk with you, and I so appreciate you sharing your story and your vulnerability with me and this community. If there's anything else you'd like to add, I will be adding Cat socials as well as some information about birdability in the description of this episode. If you all have any questions, I have an email. It's learnaboutbirds@yahoo.com. Or if you'd like to get in contact with Kat, go ahead and send me over an email or reach out to her on one of her socials and get the conversation going. Go ahead and take it over.
One thing I would leave us with it, I was trying to remember the name of Dr. Jadru Lanham's last book because it felt so important. And I just remembered it, and it's Joy is the Justice We Give Ourselves. And that, if there is a title that tells you the importance of that book, he talks so beautifully, he writes so beautifully about the ways that traditionally excluded and marginalized communities are remaining rooted in joy as resistance, remaining rooted in joy as liberation.
That is so beautiful. And I'll include a link down to his book as well in the bio because I think not only is it important for me to hear that and to honestly buy the book because that's the direction that I'm headed in personally, but share it with you all as well. So thank you
Thank you
so
for
much.
today.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you.